Welcome, everybody. This is Blackford Talks Prophecy, and our special guest tonight is John McKee. Now, you don't know that much about me. I'm a Methodist minister's kid, proudly Methodist minister's kid. And I grew up in Minnesota, which is liberal la la land, but we had conservatives up here, and we were fighting fundamentalists. So my father was the greatest pastor ever. Now, John's going to argue with me over that and say his father was the greatest ever, but I'm going to say my father, John Blackford, was the best ever in the history of the world. And so I loved my dad, and then he died in 2010. And about that same time, about 2006 through 2008, I was moving towards Messianic faith and charismata. I mean, I was having experiences and things like that. So we're going to bring in John McKee and compare notes. And John, I'd like to get started with who you are and what you represent. So let's get started.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a great pleasure to be with you this evening. Yes, we had some brief discussion about our backstory, and we all have a story. We all have to come from somewhere, and very gratified when I can connect with someone in the Messianic sphere of influence who has a Wesleyan connection, a Wesleyan background like I do. And um, yeah, a lot of while my McKee ancestors were mainly Presbyterian, from my mother's side of the family, we have many Methodist ministers, most especially my uh, maternal great grandfather, Bishop Marvin Franklin, who was Bishop of the state of Mississippi in the 1940s, a very tumultuous time. And I grew up in the Kentucky Conference of the United Methodist Church, which was certainly in the 1980s very evangelical. I remember my father being part of a new evangelical church plant, Christ United Methodist, which was actually built about 5 miles to the south of one of the runways at the Greater Cincinnati Airport. So it's always fascinating on Sunday when Delta Airlines decided to buzz the sanctuary, Um, but my parents, uh, when they came to faith, having lost the family business and they had to turn to the Lord, they very quickly connected to what Methodism was offering in the mid 1980s. My father and mother were both leaders on the Walk to Emmaus teams. My father led the first men's Walk to Emmaus in Madras, India in January 1991. He was a Sunday school teacher, a licensed lay minister, and you have to remember, 40 years ago, the Messianic movement, Jewish roots, was something very, very new. He introduced to his Sunday school class this idea of Jesus in the feasts via Zola Levitt, the late Zola Levitt, and even during Holy Week, so the time leading up to Resurrection Sunday, he had a presentation, at least, on the Last Supper and its connections to the Passover.
How did they receive that, John? How did
um, there were some people who didn't care for it, but on the whole,
Okay.
it was well received because it was just, this is what we believe Jesus did. So it
Sure.
was for teaching. And mind you, in the 1980s, this was, really far out. Um,
Okay. It
so
was.
yeah, and we have to remember, the time that a lot, and this is, at this time in the mid 1980s, even Messianic Judaism was only like 20 years old, so it was
Right.
very, very new. Um, but yeah, I grew up, my family's life was integrally tied to Methodist Church activities. My parents being on the board of trustees, very deeply involved in the Kentucky Conference, and of course, a lot of events which took us down to Asbury College, now university. The seminary is right across the street in Wilmore, and just growing up around a lot of people we know who were associated with Asbury Seminary. Many of them were older ministers who knew my great grandfather, so it was a very it was a very special time. Thinking about where we are now in 2025, simpler times, we kind of miss that. But
So would you describe Asbury to the people a little bit?
well, yes,
It's conservative, evangelical, fundamental, on fire for the Lord.
Yeah, Asbury was one of the main, more conservative. It's frequently ranked as one of the top 5 evangelical seminaries in America,
Okay.
along with Gordon Conwell, Trinity Evangelical, um, Fuller, as well as, I say this now living in the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex, the Dallas Theological Seminary. Um, but it was not hopelessly conservative either. I know, and we can get this later. We did encounter from time to time those who were, theologically liberal, and you know, uh, well, I just don't see how Paul could speak against God opposing 2 men or 2 women in a committed relationship. We There were those influences in the Kentucky Conference of the 1980s, but overall, it was a very good and positive experience for me, and particularly in matters of learning about holiness and learning about the sanctity of God's commandments. We do come from a tradition where, uh, while the Torah was artificially subdivided into the moral, civil, and ceremonial law, we still believed that the moral principles of the Torah were very important and that they were to be lived out by followers of the Messiah. So that's very much the tradition I come from, and the background I have theologically.
Were you hated for that type of a belief system within the Methodist Church?
No, no. Of course,
Really?
I was also very well. We weren't really messianic at the time,
No,
but
but in terms of being conservative, because the
no,
Methodist
not
Church.
at the time,
Okay,
not in the
okay,
mid to late 1980s.
okay,
But then, we were in a conservative conference, an
okay.
at the time. But we know things change, and we knew that there were those liberal influences. I'd hear my parents get frustrated about it. They go to some event and they'd run into somebody, and they're like, why the heck did that happen? And one of the things that did sadly happen later, because my parents were integral in getting this new church plant started, and we had a very good evangelical minister, Bill Hughes, who was definitely there when my father later got cancer and passed away. But when he left, as a lot of people know who've been in the United Methodist denomination, pastors move around, and an evangelical minister gets moved someplace else, and then a seeker-friendly minister gets moved in, and the good work that the evangelical did, goes up in smoke. And this is a lot of those people end up going to non-denominational churches. They end up going to uh, charismatic churches, and God forbid, sometimes, I mean this with all the love in the world, they can become Baptist. So uh, um, that is what happens, and maybe even a few of them investigate the Messianic movement. But yeah, we know plenty of stories of people who, they were the evangelical of this church, and they get plucked out, go someplace else, and the person who came in, seeker friendly, and then the church is for sale.
So just
So
so we could describe it here, according to A River Runs Through It, the book from many years ago, a Methodist is a Baptist that can read. Would you state that's pretty close to the facts?
it can be.
Sorry. But a Methodist, I always believed that Methodists read their Bibles. We brought our Bibles to the church meetings and we were Bible literate. And I've had people accuse me, like they said, how do you know the Bible so well? You're a Lutheran pastor's kid, aren't you? And I said, no, Methodist and conservative. We read our Bibles, we memorized scripture. We were more like charismatics that way. So, did you grow up in that environment where you really read your Bible?
I was certainly taught to read my Bible. I mean, I also, just kind of paralleling, because a lot of my Methodist experience was the first 14 to 15 years of my life. I also attended a Baptist school, Calvary Christian School, Taylor Mill, Kentucky, and it was fundamentalist, King James only. My parents had to sign something that they believed in the pre-trib rapture. I mean, this is the 1980s, so we understand when they were, and I learned a lot of good disciplines there as well. I was a teacher's pet for a while. I remember taking classes from Mrs. Steely for third and fourth grade, and then later seventh grade, Mr. Steely. They both passed away a few years ago. So, but I look back on the time growing up in northern Kentucky, because it is a very, anyone who's from that area, it is kind of locked in the past, and it is kind of, it's very parochial. Talking about how, uh, you know if you're not German or Catholic with this last name that extends this long, who are you there? And indeed, my father's mother was a Hoppenjans, and she got excommunicated for marrying my grandfather. So it's a very interesting place. So when in 1992, right after my sister Maggie was born, my father Kimball McKee was diagnosed with malignant melanoma, which is skin cancer, and he passed away within 5 months, and that totally changed everything in our family. Um, we went about a year not knowing what the next direction was going to be. And then later, my mother was down at a college reunion in Nashville, Tennessee at Vanderbilt, where she connected with Mark Huey, who she had dated right before she had started dating my father, because they were classmates. They're only 5 days apart uh, when they were born. So, and that relationship went really, really fast. And at the end of my seventh grade year, so this would have been summer of 1994, we moved away from Greater Cincinnati and we moved down to Dallas, Texas for the first time. And so this is where things got really interesting with a new stepfather, with this new blended family, also living in a huge metropolitan area, which was a lot more diverse and a lot more, fast paced and everything else. And more than anything else, one of the big questions was, what are Mark and Margaret going to do with their new family and their religion? Because Margaret was from a Methodist background and Mark Huey was from a Bible Church Calvinist background. And so this was in 1994. And after the summer visiting, trying out different churches, they ended up deciding, well, we're going to try the charismatic movement. And in 1994, this is when the Toronto Blessing was going on, if you're aware of that. And by the end of 1994, as a Christmas present, okay, just remember this over 30 years ago now, Pop, Mark Huey, decided to take my mother on a tour, on a Zola Levitt tour to Israel, which is with a Messianic Jewish group. So they ended up going to Israel. This was in December, and they came back. But while they were on the tour to Israel, the Lord impressed upon them that I want you to keep my feasts. So, okay, whatever that means. And I mean, we'd already known about, Jesus and the feasts and the Passover emphasis. So we knew what the biblical festivals were all about typologically and prophetically, even if we were pre-trib oriented, but that's okay. But it was about 30 years ago at this time when finally that word really started to grab hold. And all of a sudden, within a very short space of time, I got, like radically born again after going to a father-son camp up in California. I started, really getting into Holy Scripture. John, you're a brand new believer. You've been spiritually transformed, all of these kinds of things. I started reading a chapter of the Gospels every morning. I got to Matthew 24. And all of a sudden, within a few weeks, I've decided to become a post-tribulationist. So, and then this is on the heels of us starting to attend Baruch Hashem in Dallas, which is still is, a major Messianic Jewish congregation. And while for, I would say, the end of 1995, we spent, we go to the Saturday Shabbat service. I wouldn't always attend. And then we go to church on Sunday at a non-denom. We'd go back and forth for a while. But then by spring of 1996, we're going to the Messianic congregation exclusively. And, we don't understand everything. We know that, there are a lot of things about the Messianic Jewish believers we like. There's some things they're obviously still working through because this is something very, very new. But we know this is where the Lord wanted us to be. But it was also at that time in the spring of 1996, especially with the new millennium impending. That's when there was a huge amount of, end time speculation. There were a lot of different, charts being put out, particularly tied to the 1993 Middle East Peace Accord, Yitzhak Rabin, Yasser Arafat, Bill Clinton. And they certainly circulated in the DFW area. We got influenced by some of it. that summer of 1996, so this would have been 29 years ago, I didn't go, but Mark and Margaret, my parents, they went to the MJAA conference in Grantham, Pennsylvania, and then which was huge, and then the much smaller UMJC conference a few weeks later, which was held at that time in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. So they got to compare and contrast the two different branches of Messianic Judaism. They found MJAA to be much more spirit-filled, much more focused on evangelism. UMJC much more focused on systematic theology. There were some elements of it which were involved in ecumenicism. There was a Roman Catholic father attending there at that time. So we got involved in the Messianic community, Messianic Judaism, 29, 30 years ago. But we did get influenced by some of the prophetic speculation of the 1990s. We ended up moving around a little bit. My stepfather had an opportunity to work with a ministry in Honduras, of all places. So we ended up moving to Honduras for 8 months. It was going to be something which involved shortwave radio, proclamation of the good news, the gospel. That did fall through. We never were able to open even our containers of belongings. What really stopped a lot of it was Hurricane Mitch in 1998. So subsequent to that, we ended up working with, he ended up consulting with a ministry in Oklahoma for a while. And that's how I ended up in 1999 going to the University of Oklahoma. Later, as that assignment concluded, we ended up moving in 2000 to Central Florida, to Kissimmee. We're back in the Messianic community, but more the independent sector. So we're getting exposed to a lot of different ideas. This is when, and whether you like it or not, a lot of the two-house, lost tribes kinds of ideas started to circulate. And then when that consulting job concluded in 2002, we ended up launching Outreach Israel Ministries. And that's what we've had ever since as one of our main family outreaches. Now, when I was at the University of Oklahoma, I actually ended up getting my bachelor's degree. My major was in political science, mainly because at the turn of the millennium, I'd seen all of these end time predictions come and go. And I saw a lot of people coming to conclusions about current events, world governments, different world figures. And I'm like, it might be useful for me to learn a little bit about how the world formally works. But at the time, that's when I started, really having articles on my website. That's when there were a lot of books out there that, particularly as God was drawing a lot of non-Jewish people into the Messianic community, they were not the greatest pieces of literature. And I would see some of them, like you probably have heard of the book Fossilized Customs, among others. And I thought to myself, seeing this, I'm like, look, this book is highly condemning of all Christians as though they're pagan. That's inappropriate. Yes, there are issues which we have to work through, but I can do better than this. And so that's what got me writing articles and really starting investigating things. I started to take classes in modern Hebrew, classical Greek, available to me, different histories, ancient Israel, ancient Near East, Greece, Rome, the modern Middle East, etc., to just prepare me for whatever God had in store for me next. And so when I graduated in May of 2003, I moved back to Central Florida, joined the family business. And one of the big things, which was really, I think, just a great blessing at the time, is that Asbury Theological Seminary opened their first satellite campus, in all places, Orlando. So within a year and a half, I was enrolled at Asbury, and I started working on my master's in biblical studies. And when I went to Asbury, I would have to say that the first semester there, and by this time we had been involved in the Messianic sphere of influence for about 9 years. And I was young at the time, and the Messianic community was very new, but I did not realize how much. Yes, a lot of good things I picked up in the Messianic community, but then a lot of bad things as well, because not a lot of people had a foundation in any kind of biblical studies. They were doing theology by Strong's Concordance. They
Oh
didn't
yeah.
know how to engage with, contemporary scholarship, and not just Christian scholarship, even Jewish scholarship, and engage with it fairly and constructively. Um, Throughout 2005 to 2009, that's when we had the Hebrews debacle hit the Messianic sphere of influence. Um,
What was that exactly?
um, that was from Monty Judah. So
Oh,
the
okay.
Hebrew,
Sorry.
so
So,
that was, and um, you know, I forgive, I can overlook any, false predictions or faulty prognostications people made, but Hebrews, and claiming that the author of Hebrews misquoted from the Tanakh when it was really the Greek
oh,
Septuagint, that was just like, okay. Um, but
that's
then,
a bridge too far.
and it's like, there are plenty of, well, we don't, some of the claims that were being made about Hebrews, well, we don't know who the author of Hebrews is. Like, yeah, but technically half of the Tanakh is anonymous,
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the historical books, as we call them, well, they were written by the Southern Kingdom's well, who are they? So some of the logic applied to Hebrews can more easily be applied to dismantle the validity of the Tanakh. And of course, um, not that I believe in the JEDP documentary hypothesis. These are the kinds of things I was having to engage with at the time, and I'm thinking to myself, what are some of these teachings out there, and how much of it is just the result of inadequate training in just basic biblical studies. But more so when 2008 hit, then there was another much more scandalous thing hit. The independent Messianic community, would be called Hebrew Roots now, uh, and it was polygamy. Men having
Oh yeah.
multiple wives.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is something, my sister Jane was like, if so I'm single, and if I go to a Messianic congregation, one of these dirty old men looks at me,
Yeah.
is he going to want me as his second, or God help me, third wife? I mean, and that was like, okay, I recognize this on the fringe out there. Of course, this is 17 years. Recognize on the fringe. I recognize most people are like, we don't support polygamy. It was never blessed by God, and those who practiced it, they had their problems with it. But because very few people would speak against it, these kinds of things, they came up in my seminary years, and it was a test for our family. Okay, are you going to continue in this Messianic community, or are you probably going to, like a lot of people would, go back to church and then just do the festivals on the side or at home and be enriched by it? So, we've had these moments where it's like, okay, are you going to continue? And there have been some others too since then. Um, but subsequent to me getting my MA in biblical studies, and uh, one of the things which did happen when we had the graduation ceremony is my Old Testament professor, Brian Russell, pulled my sister Maggie off to the side and said, oh, I got something to tell you. And later I found out that, yes, I did win the Zondervan Biblical Languages Award, and
Ooh.
it was for Greek. But according
Oh.
to Dr. Russell, he said we would have given him Hebrew as well, but we couldn't give one person 2 awards. So, so we literally had to flip a coin and decide who got which one. Um, so that was the secret.
Oh my. Now this is a Methodist university. How do the
Yeah.
professors handle your messianic thought in a
Okay.
Methodist university?
Well, a lot of people, and this, I guess, this happens to anybody in the Messianic community who goes and gets any kind of formal religious studies training. Oh, you're going to cemetery. Oh, you're not going to learn anything. It's like, well, what purpose are you going to school for? Are you going to school to try to convert everyone to your beliefs, or are you going to school to learn skills? Because I went there to learn skills, and I knew that because of a lot of the things I encountered in the first 9 years of being in the Messianic movement. It's like, there's a lot of things I don't know. I mean, all of a sudden, your first 2 semesters, you're spending literally thousands of dollars to get all these new books in your library, like some of them behind me. Um, and yes, even in 2005, there was eBay, which I think was very good. But I'm getting all these new books and new lexicons and all of this and software and I'm learning how to dig a lot deeper than a number of the people I saw. So that did go through some changes. Once or twice, I had an altercation with local Messianic leaders. What are you learning at that school? Why are you there? Why are you having problems with what we're teaching here? And it had nothing to do with the basic Messianic message or Israel or anything else. It's like you're coming to some conclusions which are not as based in what not only Christians for many centuries have concluded, but even Jews. So you have to be able to engage with this. But I went there mainly to learn skills. But from time to time, we would have an altercation of sorts regarding Israel, the Jewish people, not so much matters of the law, because even though Asbury is a Methodist seminary, we had people from other denominations and traditions. We had a lot of people who were, like Assemblies of God, Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. We had many Anglicans, of course, because John Wesley was originally Anglican, but we had Presbyterians. We had our token United Church of Christ professor who believed that everything up to the quote unquote return from Babylon was fiction. So we had these things, and honestly, you can't just live in this bubble and not engage with some of this. And I tell people the Messianic community, you think that you don't need this, and I was engaging with some of it at at a with liberal Protestants, the few we had, but most of Judaism sits to the left of that. So what are you going to do? Because most of Judaism just looks at, as someone explained it to me many years ago, Reform Judaism is the Democratic Party with the Jewish holidays. Went to seminary, you go to learn other different perspectives. One of the big things which was changes in our society during my time at seminary, so 2005 to 2009, was the second Bush term, George Bush Jr. And that's when significant questions about why did we go to war in Iraq? A lot of people I knew, their friend was killed, their friend has come back with no legs. Even someone I went to seminary with, he was training to become an army chaplain. He was sent to Afghanistan and then got shot up in his back and had to have his pancreas removed. So these are the kinds of things which were happening 2005, 2009. We were being introduced to this new person politically named Barack Obama. He was very new, very enthusiastic. He was influencing a number of the people I went to school with, even a number of my instructors. That was something I had to deal with far more than the Messianic thing. Although issues regarding Israel did come up, I do remember one professor saying, I don't believe the state of Israel has any biblical right to exist, but I think it might have a right to exist for Jewish self-determination, but it has to be, flexible on what it does with its land and all that. So there were things like that, which now we see, really hitting the scene, which I had to sort through. Also, about as far as we got regarding Judaism, I mean, we did definitely get into Jewish backgrounds of the New Testament. At the time, the big thing with Pauline studies was the new perspective of Paul. So had to study things like, N.T. Wright, definitely James Dunn, who since passed away. I ended up taking 2 exegesis classes on Romans because I failed one. No, actually, that's not true. But in both classes I took, we spent 3 weeks on Romans chapter 1, because after all, what does against nature actually mean? And there was an incident, this was in 2007 in class, where we were having to discuss, okay, was Paul talking about homosexuality? Was he talking about something else? What do we do here? And I remember one lady in our class said, I know it's against the ethos statement, but I think that Paul was wrong in terms of 2 men or 2 women being in a committed relationship. And I know that's really upsetting when people see that, but I'm like, hey, you better be introduced to this now because it's all out there in the world of ideas. And that is what going to school is about. It's about being exposed to some points of view you disagree with in order to get you prepared to encounter them in the wider world. So
Okay, so my thought is that as I was a Methodist, I understood Methodism and Wesley and things like that, and Dad and I would laugh over issues like one Baptist pastor came up to my father and said, "Yes, the thief on the cross was pulled down off the cross, baptized, and put back up again," and we laughed. So the point is, as a Messianic, I'm not Jewish in terms of attending a shul, although I have a rabbi friend that's Lubavitch. But anyway, the point is, I can view the other faiths much better now coming from my background. It's just easier to pick out where the differences are. I mean, did that help you at all?
it did probably the most interesting thing, and when I tell this to different Messianic Jewish rabbis and people I know, they're really shocked because they encounter a lot of non-Jewish people in their congregations. They're very skeptical and even hostile sometimes of mainline Jewish customs and traditions. I mean, you've seen this. And I said, well, we're not talking about a lot of more the orthodox extremities because most Messianic Jews don't go that far. They're, conservative reform level. I said, what really helped me to get a good framework for understanding the value of things like Jewish tradition, the Mishnah, the Talmud, this kinds of literatures. Well, when I was in seminary and reconnected to my heritage, I learned about the Wesleyan quadrilateral, which was,
Never heard of that. What's that?
scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. Because
Mm.
the Wesleyan quadrilateral, how Wesleyans do theology, scriptures are primary authority, then
Oh, yeah.
tradition, reason, and experience. And I said, look, I've just basically, in order to appreciate a lot of elements of mainstream Jewish tradition, a lot of these bodies of literature which we can consult, I've just applied it into a messianic way. So I don't look at, oh, you're turning to the Mishnah, you're turning to the Talmud, this is so evil. It's like, it's just history, philosophy, commentary. And actually, the training that I have has a place for it, not the place, but it has a place for it. So you're not going to see me be super hostile to that. Now, honestly, I don't spend hours on end, reading the Talmud. I don't see hours on end reading the Dead Sea Scrolls. We can get into this later. I spend more time trying to figure out what's going on in the world. In more recent years, my political science training is kicked back in,
Yeah.
but uh, no, learning the Wesleyan quadrilateral and applying it in a way to the Messianic experience has helped a lot of people I know really calm down and be more stable when they see people mention a quote here or a quote there. And I'm saying, look, they're not saying they endorse every single thing in this body of literature. They're trying to consider an opinion. And look, that's, all of these, secondary or tertiary bodies of literature, whether it's uh, ancient Near Eastern mythology, Greco-Roman works, ancient Christian works, they might have a place when you investigate a particular issue. It just depends on what the subject is. Now, moving us forward a little bit in the story, in the narrative. I graduated seminary in 2009. And this is at the same time when my sister Maggie is in her final year of high school. And she's trying to figure out where am I going to go to college? And originally she thought she was going to go to one school, but they got a little woke when woke wasn't a thing. And so we had this, really strong urge as a family, particularly my mother and I. She was like, we need to go on a family road trip back to Oklahoma. We need to check out the University of Oklahoma. Because one of the things my sister Maggie really wanted to do, because she was number 4 in her class in high school, is she wanted to possibly join the Navy ROTC program. So one of the things which happened was we went on a road trip up to Norman. This was in July of 2009. I hadn't been since I graduated, so I was really excited. to go. And this is also the time. This is a side thing about me personally. This is at the time when I had just started getting into my barbecue hobby because I'm a pit master. So I smoke, brisket, turkey, chicken, everything else. Um, so I was really excited to, go to Texas, Oklahoma, go to a number of restaurants, uh, start collecting samples of what I wanted to reproduce back home in Florida at the time. But anyway, so we walked as a family, the three of us, we walked into the field house. I'm sorry, the armory, not the field house, the armory next to the Oklahoma Memorial Stadium. And that's where Army ROTC had their facility, Navy ROTC had theirs. We walked in and we just kind of all felt, Maggie is going to University of Oklahoma. She is going to go into Navy ROTC, and they had that um, machine shop smell. You smell, when you go to a warship, and it's just like that's what hit, and it was just like boom. And because Maggie would now be orienting herself out west, all of a sudden our family ministry outreach Israel, we were wondering, okay, are we going to stay in Florida indefinitely? And by 2010, by the time she is entering in as a freshman, we already are getting the impression we're going to be moving back to DFW. And we need to start preparing ourselves. And along with that, we also knew that the DFW area has, one of the largest Messianic Jewish communities in the world. And how are we going to be reintegrating? And this is also at the time where a lot of seminary experience, particularly a lot of access to different perspectives, new literature, etc. It's beginning to really take hold. So, yes, while we had interacted with people like, the two house people, the one law people, etc., what do we need to alter? What do we need to recalibrate? What do we need to review? And we actually had about a 2.5-year window to do it because it was very difficult to sell the house. Uh, uh, 2010 into 2012. But by the end of 2012, we had relocated back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, back to the same zip code we lived in North Dallas in 1994. And at that time, just like in 1995, 2012, we went back to Baruch Hashem. And when we were at Baruch Hashem, that's when we started to, wonder, hey, what happened to all the friends we knew before? And what happened to, the people we, really liked in 1995, 1996, 1997. And we had discovered that they had been part of a new congregation. In fact, a number of new congregations were present in DFW at the time. We ended up reconnecting with our good friend, David Schiller, who's originally from New York State. He had started his congregation called Etz Chaim, which was smaller. That's where most of our old friends had gotten plugged into. So in the summer of 2013, so this would have been 12 years ago now, started out going to Baruch Hashem one Shabbat, going to Etz Chaim one Shabbat, went back and forth, and then we ended up going exclusively to Etz Chaim. And then within a year, my stepfather, Mark Huey, was asked to become a shamish, a deacon. Within another year, he was asked to become an elder. This was also at a time when Etz Chaim had made a transition from being a UMJC congregation to an MJAA congregation. And this was still at the time when the MJAA had a regional conference north of DFW Airport. And we, as a ministry, exhibited in 2014. And I got to sit next to the whole time a gentleman who since passed away, Mark Diane, who was in charge of a lot of what went on behind the scenes. But Mark Diane was originally from Cincinnati. And so we really connected. And he was a Messianic Jewish believer, and that got kind of our family on the fast track to getting to know a lot of the MJAA leaders very, very quickly. And in 2015, that's when no, it would have been early 2016. This had a very, very interesting chance encounter. my stepfather, Mark Huey, his brother, Doug Huey, were attending a SMU basketball game in Dallas, and they were sitting next to an acquaintance of Doug, and this acquaintance was involved with Baylor Scott White, which is big hospital conglomerate here in the DFW area. And his little project with Baylor Scott White was he would send surplus but still an excellent quality medical equipment to different parts in the world. So deeply connected to different humanitarian groups, missionary groups, sending things to Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Pop, just the way he was, has had this question. So, what are you sending to Israel? And he says, "Well, we're not really sending anything to Israel." So that's what got the ball rolling with Pop, calling up Hank Rich of the Joseph Project, ministry of the MJAA, which sends humanitarian aid to Israel. And by 2016, that really got us, jump started into the Messiah Conference in Grantham, Pennsylvania, exhibiting there with all of our books. But that's how he got plugged into now being a director of partner relations with the Joseph Project, which has now become the largest importer of humanitarian aid to Israel. And it's opened up a lot of doors for the Messianic Jewish community in Israel for dialogue about who this person Yeshua is, dialogue about where you're going to be spending eternity, because the Messianic Jewish community in Israel cannot easily declare the message, the good news, but using a humanitarian project, hey, we're here to help you. Whether it was in one of the pre-October the 7th terrorist attacks or something, and now certainly in the post-October the 7th world, the Joseph Project is very much an integral part of helping the Jewish community in Israel, and it's a messianic ministry. So that's huge.
That's wonderful.
But as this is happening, I'm getting reintegrated into the Messianic Jewish community. I'm discovering things about the Messianic Jewish community I really like. A few things I'm like, okay, it's still an emerging community. Doesn't know what it's going to emerge into in the future. Having to sort through, is this something all non-Jewish believers need to be doing at the present? Is it something you've got to be specially called into at the present? I said, look, I've always believed that these kinds of things are to be a work of the Holy Spirit via the process of sanctification, to use some of the things from my own background. So, and I can understand why, certain Messianic Jewish believers, are very hesitant to just have all these non-Jews come into their congregations, because, there's these many centuries, complications, Judaism, Christianity. How many Gentile powers have promised, well, we'll give you more rights, we'll be more tolerant. And of course, they're just lying through their teeth. So, I can understand that it's a process of wanting to develop trust and everything, and saying that, look, we want to make sure that the people who are genuinely called here are here. And that was something which, like when we were involved in the the mid 1990s, the UMJC still isn't that favorable to non-Jewish believers being involved, whereas the MJ is much more open. They're like, look, if God's called you to be here, we want you to be here. We're not going to coerce you to do anything. That's between you and the Lord. Okay, that's compatible with, it's got to be a work of the Holy Spirit. And we want to make sure that when you come, you will co-labor with us in the salvation of Israel. That's huge. So it's not just a matter of you, oh, I think Shabbat is great and the festivals are great and I'm doing Torah study. Okay, great. That's wonderful. But what does that mean in terms of when the rubber meets the road and we need you to stand against anti-Semitism with us, or we need you to stand with us for the state of Israel, or now we've got anti-Zionism. So, there are a lot of people who, as I like to say, they don't make it past 3 years. I'm sorry. I mean, they just don't. I kind of have that 3-year rule. But the people who do make it, who come from evangelical backgrounds, it's because the Lord is going to see that they're co-laboring in some significant way, which now is absolutely imperative of what we've seen in the post-October the 7th world.
What causes them to leave at about 3 years? What is it?
It depends, and everyone's situation is different. I mean, there's the common, well, I feel like I'm being treated as second class. There's that common reason. Uh, Other reasons might not necessarily have to do with, well, I think, Shabbat's a great thing, and I think a kosher style of diet is a great thing. It might actually be some kind of conflict that they've got with the Jewish value system on other matters. I mean, that can happen. And our family can say that, sometimes we've had those conflicts, and it's like, okay, well, how serious is it? If it's just, they do things one way and our family does things another way, it's probably not that big a deal. But it might mean that you don't bring up certain subjects in certain conversations. It just depends on what it is. It might be something as simple as, well, why did you do it that way? Have you thought about this other way? It depends on what the issue is, or the disposition, but it may have nothing to do with what you may think it has to do with.
Interesting, because I've seen up in Minnesota, it's more like 6 months. They come
Okay.
in, and some of the places that we have up here are kind of Christianity on Sabbath, and so the
Okay.
people plug in for about 6 months, and then they kind of burn out.
Right. So it's Saturday church.
It is, yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, and mind you, I don't know if the Messianic community is for everybody today. It may not be for everybody, but for those whom God has genuinely called, you're definitely going to be focusing on matters of Israel and matters of when we are. Now, to just get you back more into the narrative, it was in 2018, questions started being asked of me. It's like, okay, well, John, you got a bachelor's degree, you got a master's degree. Are you going to get anything else? And I'm like, look, we got to pay off the master's degree before we do anything else. And we're still paying it off. But I was approached by Joel Lieberman, who later became the president of the MJAA. This is Paul Lieberman's son, who's a major Messianic Jewish pioneer. Because when my parents, this is before I started attending, they went to the IAMCS Rabbis Conference in Orlando, where we used to live, and they saw a non-Jewish person ordained at that conference as a Messianic teacher. And they said, this is something John really needs to look into. He needs to go through an ordination process with the IAMCS, International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues. He's got favor with a number of these leaders. They've read his books. They really like him, developed a, dialogue. And so in 2018, we started working on the paperwork for that because yes, getting an ordination was really good, but also going through the educational process of taking things like Jewish approaches to world history, Jewish approaches to the good news, learning about the Jewish community in the modern period, things you could never have taken at Asbury Seminary. And it was relatively inexpensive. Like, I think we can do this. So the ordination process, I got licensed at the 2019 IMCS conference in Orlando. It was about 3 years. It did get delayed because of the pandemic, but it was something very important. And they said I was one of the best students they had in the program. But of course, as these things are going on, I think, and we're still sorting through what took place in 2020. Our family was attending the Southwestern MJAA Regional in Irvine, California over President's Day, February 2020. Already, I'm sure you're familiar with how a lot of charismatic types, this is even spilled over into the Messianic community. We're saying 2020 is going to be the year of 2020 vision, right? We're going to have 2020 vision. We're going to see everything. And some of us are like, once we got into 2020, we're like, hey, give me some acid, give me some bleach. I don't want to see anything. Because, we were at that conference in Irvine, and like half of the people at the hotel where it was being held were Asian, and they had these masks on. And on the drive home, I all of a sudden start having strange chills. And, we get home, and I had kind of a nasty fever, nasty cough for a while. And soon enough, we figured out I was one of the first cases for COVID, and March of 2020 hits, and we had the pandemic start. We've got lockdown starting, and people are wondering what is going on here. Uh, some people think that the end of the world is at hand. We've got another plague on our hands. Others are like, look, God is trying to get our attention. We also know other things, politically, which happened in 2020. Of course, we got in 2021, other health matters, and God is really trying to get our attention. And even though we had been back in the DFW area for over 6 years, and we were going through a number of changes as a family. We ended up having to move really quickly from North Dallas back to McKinney, Texas, because the lease of the house we had went out and it wasn't going to be renewed. But we ended up moving to a much bigger, much nicer house in the McKinney area, kind of out in the country too. Um, but we're going through a very difficult time spiritually in 2019. We had a number of relatives die on us during that period as well. My parents, their one grandfather dies, another grandmother dies, and then later another grandmother dies. So it's in this period, and we're really trying to figure out, okay, so what is the future going to be like? And there were some moments when it was like, do we even want to stay in the Messianic community? I mean, we love Israel and we love the Jewish people, but we're having moments of not disagreement, but we see things differently sometimes. But the pandemic was something which really nailed us. Like, no, you're going to stay in the Messianic community. Look at your story going all the way back to the 90s and even to the 80s. This is part of your narrative. A new chapter is unfolding, and what's taking place now in 2020, 2021 is going to really affect this final stretch of salvation history. Now, you don't want to be presumptuous and be caught overstating things, but there were definite changes which took place in 2020, and they've kept us, paying attention to what's going on, how people respond. Certainly, there are things, new technologies, just this whole live streaming feature, which was always there for a while, but now it's really been employed. And how do we let the Lord use us as a stabilizing influence with so many of the things we have seen and encountered?
Okay, so let's ask a question here, John. Uh, a good description of Sabbath church. So, John, I'd like you to start out with this instead. Start out with what's a Hebrew roots, what's a Messianic Jew, and what's a Sabbath church?
Okay, well, a Messianic Jew is a Jewish person who believes in Yeshua as the Jewish Messiah and maintains his or her Jewish heritage.
Okay.
A Messianic non-Jewish person would be someone who is aligned with Messianic Judaism as that kind of faith expression. Hebrew roots back in the 1990s and even into the 2000s was just used as a synonym almost for Jewish roots. So, Hebrew roots would focus on things like study of the Hebrew scriptures, Hebrew language, maybe even some Jewish literature. Jewish roots would then extend into Jewish literature, Jewish culture, Jewish history, not only from the biblical period, but all the way perhaps up to the present. Um, uh, in the early 2010s, the term Hebrew roots started to be used more as people who were involved in the two house sub movement. They stopped using that term because of polygamy and all of that. And they didn't like polygamy, but they started, well, we're just going to emphasize Hebrew roots now. Okay. But now Hebrew roots can just mean anything which is fringe, somehow associated with the Hebrew scriptures. It tends to be very antagonistic toward Judaism, antagonistic toward Christianity. You promote things like flat earth, promote things like Ashkenazi Jews are really Khazars, promote all kinds of really strange things. And so, yeah, it didn't have to be that way, but that's just what happened. Um, and there are some of us who have older materials which say a term like Hebrew roots or Hebraic roots, where we mean connection to the Hebrew scriptures, and when we update it, we got to change it to your faith heritage in Israel scriptures. We have to do that now. because of the possible association.
So, from my perspective, I view Sunday or Sabbath church rather as being the same praise music that you would hear in an AOG type church. Very similar type songs and things like that. And then the sermon would be somewhat similar too, but you'll throw in a little bit of Jewishness, maybe a little bit of cantering, maybe a few Hebrew phrases or words, but not really, not like Messianic Judaism, right?
Right. Now, it can be. I mean, what we have observed as a family is no two Messianic congregations are alike.
Right.
And, like being in the MJA, IMCS sphere of influence, there are a lot of people who are charismatic. But then there also are a lot of people who are dispensational and pre-trib. Uh, and and one of the things that's kind of interesting is this is where I get to pull a few pages from my Wesleyan heritage. What do you think about the charismatic movement? What do you think about the moving of the Spirit? I'm like, well, we do believe in principle that the gifts of the Spirit are active, but I was always trained. The charismatic movement, the Pentecostal movements, many of them are wayward brethren, and that is especially true of all of the scandals which have occurred in recent history and in more modern history. Not to mention any names, but over the past 2 years, some of the really big charismatic scandals have people who have directly intersected with the Messianic movement on some level. Um, and that is concerning to me. But that's in process and still trying to figure that out.
So let's pretend there are three men that I could think of: Arnold Fruchtenbaum, Michael Brown, and I'll come up with Sid Roth, that are Jewish and claim to be Messianic Jews, but they don't believe in Sabbath or Torah or any of those types of things.
Right. Well, Arnold Fruchtenbaum is dispensational,
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah, and he's Dallas Theological Seminary dispensational, and he just does things like Shabbat or the festivals as a part of his Jewish culture.
Okay.
Then you have Michael Brown, who, yes, there are questions about him, but he would have very much aligned with the old Hebrew Christian movement. If you're
Yeah.
familiar with that, okay.
1967 through 73.
Well, no,
Jesus.
the Hebrew Christian movement goes back to the 19th century
Oh wow.
as
Okay.
part of the of some of the early Jewish evangelism movements in different Protestant denominations. So my sister Maggie, when she got her master's degree, she did it on some of the uh, early societies interested in evangelizing the Jews, and she also got a multi-day scholarship to go to Oxford in England, Oxford University, to go look at the primary documents in their archives. So yeah, the university paid for that and everything. But some of these, early societies to evangelize the Jews, going back to Lord Shaftesbury and others, uh, they saw that God wasn't finished with Israel and that there's going to be a lot of Jews who come to Jesus in the last days, and so this is sort of the beginnings of the Hebrew Christian movement. The Hebrew Christian movement of the late 19th and then early 20th centuries, very much involved with mainline Protestant denominations. So Anglicanism, Baptist, Presbyterian. Alfred Edersheim was a Presbyterian, Methodist even. My great grandfather had Hebrew Christians in his church in Birmingham, Alabama. So these were Jewish believers in Jesus. They recognized Yeshua as Messiah. Um, they met in different society groups. So, like the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America was originally the Hebrew Christian Alliance of America. But with the Hebrew Christian movement, you could do Jewish things on the side, but they really encouraged assimilation. So you need to come to church, and really the main point of assimilation was the intermarriage. So it wasn't just yeah, you can do things like Passover on the side as part of your culture, but you're Christian now, and a way to become part of our community is to intermarry. So there are many people today who are, let's say, they're 1/16th Jewish or they're 1/32nd Jewish because they had an ancestor or two who was a Hebrew Christian who assimilated. And when I was at the University of Oklahoma, I had a friend who was from Tulsa, and one of his grandparents was a Hebrew Christian, and he would throw his hand down on his thigh and he would say, "This is my Jewish leg, and I don't let ham touch my Jewish leg." That is as far as his Jewishness went. Um,
Okay.
and so by the 1960s, of course, you have World War II, you have the Holocaust, rebirth of the state of Israel. That did delay a lot of the Hebrew Christian movement. But by the late 1960s, that's when you start seeing this move of, yes, it's important that we believe in Jesus, but let's do it, as Jews who are faithful to our covenantal heritage, not just as some kind of a front for the church, Christianity per se. And so that's when you saw the big watershed event, Hebrew Christian Alliance becoming Messianic Jewish Alliance. And that's when they really made a decision, even though, there were some, push and pull along the way. There are a number of books which detail this. Paul Lieberman is trying to get his memoirs out. He's in his mid 80s now. But really late 1960s, early 1970s, we meet on Shabbat, we do the festivals of Israel, we keep some kind of kosher, we have a worship service more like the synagogue and not like the church. Yes, there were some charismatic influences at the time, but they had a lot going against them. Not only, oh, you're a Jewish believer in Jesus and your family regards you as dead,
Right.
possibly to the point of having a marker in some cemetery, and there's nothing there, right? I mean,
Right.
I can think of nothing more insulting. To well, this is just a phase. You'll move out of it. You'll talk to your uncle who's a psychiatrist, and he'll get you out of it. So the early Messianic Jewish pioneers, they had a lot going against them, and then from a lot of people in evangelicalism, it's like, well, you've erected the middle wall of petition again, and you're trying to put people under the law, and dot 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 dot. And ironically, some of the main support for Messianic ministry did actually come from dispensationalism. Uh, because, well, if we have a Messianic Jewish community, we might be accelerating the pre-trib rapture. I mean, it was
Oh, that kind. Okay.
that kind of mindset. So you have a lot of these influences, and you still have to navigate around them. When we were involved in the Messianic community, um, back in the late 1990s, it was still overwhelmingly pre-trib. But when
Okay.
we got back in 2012, 2013, and started, going to Messianic events on the ground, talking to people, it's now either large minority post-trib or just way for like 51, 52% post-trib. So the demographics have changed. I mean, um, there are new dynamics in this. So
So here's the question. So where do the Albigensians and the Waldonians fall in the scheme of things? And would you consider the Worldwide Church of God? Why am I blanking on the man that ran that? Armstrong,
okay,
the Armstrong family.
I'm gonna have to look into those two groups and refresh myself. So I'm not gonna give you
I
an
figured
answer.
you'd know the answer. I don't know
But
the answer on either one of
the
those.
Worldwide Church of God, did get started as a Sabbath keeping and festival keeping group. Herbert Armstrong.
Yep.
But it was also highly influenced by British Israelism. And
Oh, that's why.
the idea that Britain and America, or Ephraim and Manasseh, you really don't see a lot of those. We saw some of those influences at the turn of the millennium. I hate you don't see a lot of those influences now because a lot of the Worldwide Church of God people are passing away.
Okay, that's why.
So
Yeah, they are older, no doubt.
yeah.
What
So
about the SDA, Seventh Day Adventists, and their Sabbath keeping and things like that?
well,
Do
right.
they?
I mean, they are a Sabbath keeping group. I haven't really gotten into their theology recently. Uh, there's a book I've got in my library, Four Views on Sabbath, and one of them is a Seventh Day Adventist, and they present some arguments that some things we would agree with.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, in my family's Wesleyan heritage, so we actually had different people be very strong about what theologically would be labeled as a semi-Sabbatarianism, but they would treat Sunday, really strictly as a Sabbath. Um, and so you wouldn't go shopping, or you couldn't go shopping in the 1930s. But they based on a lot of the teachings of John Wesley and others, they looked at the first day of the week as the Christian Sabbath. They were very strict, probably more strict than most of us are in the Messianic community regarding Shabbat. Um, And one of my ancestors, let me make sure I get this right. First cousin twice removed. My mother's going to kill me if I get it wrong. But was Charles Allen. And Charles Allen was a minister in Atlanta, Georgia, and then later Houston, Texas. And one of his most prominent books was a really short book called God's Psychiatry, and it dealt with the four most frequently read parts of the Bible. So the Ten Commandments, Psalm 23, the Sermon on the Mount, and the Lord's Prayer. I believe that's what it was. So, and he actually went into, you need to make sure you keep a Sabbath of some sorts. Otherwise, you're probably going to always be exhausted. That was
Okay.
his conclusion in the 1950s. So,
And Seventh-day Baptists, have you ever bumped into them at all?
no, I don't tend to bump into those people that much anymore. One of the things which we talk about, what is the future of the Messianic community going to be? This is the thing everybody avoids, and yet this is the one thing which really gets me going, because
Okay.
we've seen a lot of changes just the past 5 years, and a lot of people in the Messianic community, it didn't really do anything for them. I mean that with all the love and respect in the world, but in the past almost 2 years, that has really gotten a lot of people stirred up. October the 7th, all of a sudden, even here in the DFW area, different Messianic congregations have got swastikas painted on them. What do we do here? We know people whose congregations lease from a church. And guess what? The church has decided not to renew their lease.
Yep.
Things like this are happening. And, there are a lot of people who are really worried, and you've got it in the state of Minnesota. We've got it here in Dallas, Fort Worth. What do we do about these autonomous Islamic communities, which are just popping up everywhere? A few months ago, I went to our local HEB, the Texas grocery store. You can only get it in Texas. And all of a sudden, walking down the meat aisle, there's a section called Crescent Foods. And I'm like, what the hell is this?
Oh, wow.
And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's like, well, okay, whatever. And so these kinds of things are popping up in rural America. And, a lot of Messianic Jewish believers are like, well, do I have my paperwork for Israel if I need to get it? A lot of young Messianic Jewish believers I know who are, in their 20s, they're like, I'm thinking about, at least going to Israel for an extended period of time, 2 to 3 months, go there for a summer, see if it's a place I need to move to. These are things which are definitely happening. Significant rise in anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. We think about, well, in a very weak moment, I know people, non-Jews in the Messianic community, like, I'm going to go visit my old church. And then they raise the question about, well, why didn't you pray for Israel this week? And boom, they find out, I think God wants me in the Messianic congregation, because we are living in a time when we're getting closer. A lot of, certainly, we wonder about, President Trump 2017, then Biden 2021, and now Trump is back. What does this all mean? What does this all indicate for the end time scenario? Is it important? Is it not important? And mind you, as I do in my different news analyses, I say, the news changes day to day, but just be sure you're paying attention and be sure you see how different things are playing out and how things are opening up. We know from, a few years ago, that's an excellent question. Many people on the left, on the woke left, were just, like, what do we do with this? What is woke? And, what's the deal with, Bud Light and Target and all of these other things? But then in more recent years, what's the woke right? And, well, the Jews are in control of everything, and AIPAC and is running the U.S. government. And what are some of the newer things? All of this. the church is the new Israel, Christian nationalism, all these different phenomenon. And regardless of the specifics, things are going to get more and more complicated the closer we get to Yeshua's return. And then just to freak everybody out, and so I've got relatives, people I'm immediately related to, who believe, and I've met them halfway on this. They think that, well, I think God probably has other stories playing out in the universe. And
Oh
I'm
no.
like, okay. So, because the universe is vast and we don't know everything. So God's got, other civilizations playing out. And I've just said, well, neither you nor I have all of the information. And one of the things we can all agree on, because we have to start where we agree first, when the Lord returns, he will reveal all the secrets of the universe to us. Everyone agrees on that. And so we haven't lost them because of that. And I think that particularly because I am very big on, how do we not lose millennials, Generation Z, Generation Alpha, Generation Beta after that? How do you stay in conversation with them rather than just, shut them down and no, we don't need to. And that's where I think the uniqueness of a lot of the apologetics I do comes into play because, in Judaism, any question can be asked. Any question can be asked in Judaism. And in Protestantism, we believe that God gave us brains and reason to understand his word because we don't need the Pope to tell us what to believe. And we can study his word and we can come to a resolution on this. So if we can use those two strengths together, we can probably resolve this, even if it takes us a little bit of time, whatever the controversy is.
So before you answer this question from Carla, I'd like you to explain what Messianic Apologetics is and what show, how do people find you? How
Okay.
did I find you?
Right. Probably predestination. I'm just
No,
kidding.
no.
um,
Anti-Calvinist.
yes, well, we all have a Calvinistic streak, which comes out from time to time,
Okay.
which where we can't explain anything.
But it is funny. You were
Yeah,
predestined to say
it is
that.
funny. Yes, I am the editor of the website Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. We've got a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions, entries, books, commentaries, other resources. I would have to say that our flagship book is probably the study, The New Testament Validates Torah, which was just updated in 2024. So we definitely will deal with issues not only involving the general validity of the law, and will be respectful to Christian traditions, which have at least looked at the moral law as remaining in force, because they got a lot of good arguments in favor of that. But we also will deal with things like these contemporary controversies over the past 30 years. How do we resolve the two-house matter? How do we resolve the one law matter? Now we've got things like the pronomian movement, which is emerging. We have an emphasis in many parts of Messianic Judaism now on distinction theology. I mean, that's just a huge array. And then, some of the subjects I'm interested in, myself, for me personally.
So nomos is law, so pro-law or anti-law, antinomian.
Right.
So we're
We are all,
seeing that popping up.
yeah, we are all, in a manner of speaking, small p pronomian. We're all small p pro law.
Okay. Okay.
But this is the capital P specific movement, which
Oh,
has been developing. So that's what I'm referring to.
okay.
Um,
Didn't know that existed. Thank you.
yeah, and then in antithesis to a lot of it, there's also an individual who's real Christian individual, real big online, who says that we're all a part of Torahism. So we don't. That's something you can
We'll
encounter from
talk
time to
after the
time.
show. I want to find out who that is. So, okay.
Okay. But one of the things which is kind of interesting is, part of my political science training, I almost went into counterintelligence.
Wow.
Um, and so, because I studied, on the heels of 9/11, you want to learn about, terrorism, counterterrorism. How do we stop these tragedies from taking place? How do you gather information? How do you sort between data and noise?
Sure.
Because because one of the things which people in the Messianic sphere of influence like to do is they like to talk about all kinds of things. And I got no problem with that. But you also, how do you use the reasoning skills to, okay, how much of this is fluff versus how much of this is like, has got a core substance to it? Uh, as the expression goes, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. So there's something here, but I don't particularly know. That's why we have to keep monitoring. We have to keep watching events. But when that's applied to theology, that can be very, very interesting because, we haven't met in person, but I am 6'6".
You
And
are.
yes, I'm 6'6". And so I hear things, just audibly that a lot of other people can't hear. Um, One of the great places to get information at the local congregation is, of course, at the Oneg line, your fellowship lunchtime, because people just, open their mouths and go back to your congregational leadership and you're like, hey, you're not going to believe what, so and so said, right? Um, can you believe this? And when you go to large conference level events, you hear about what people are like physically, you hear what people are talking about. And as you let all that information, as you sort through it over a period of days or weeks, you're like, okay, Lord, what is the future going to be? What things do we not know about, which we are now being alerted to as possible issues? The big thing about apologetics is it is the term meaning, apologia. It's a defense. Sometimes it does involve apologizing for the messes other people have made, but that's like, but it involves a defense, but it doesn't involve, just defending the status quo. Because one of the good things, if you follow any kind of a scientific method, when new information comes into how do you account for that new information? And we today have access to information which our Wesleyan ancestors didn't have access to. I mean, and we expect to see them in the kingdom, but they were not supposed to be in the phase of development we are in today. And we have a lot which we are responsible for with that information regarding some of the errors in Christian history, what God is doing now with the salvation of the Jewish people, restoration of Israel, and what the future of what the Messianic community is going to emerge into. Because in the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of the pioneers are now no longer going to be with us. And one of the deep concerns I know a lot of people have is many Messianic Jewish congregations do not have a succession plan. And you're not going to have a rabbi who is 85 years old. I mean, no offense, it's just not going to happen. And so one of the questions is, well, are we going to see the young people just, are they going to go to church? Are they going to go to a synagogue? Are they going to go to Israel? Are we going to go from having formal congregations to having informal home groups? I mean, we don't know. I'm sure it's going to be all of the above for a while. And how much of that is affected by what's happening in the world? Like one of the big things a lot of congregations have, I already touched on this, they don't have their own meeting place. They rent from a church.
I
Now
rented.
that can actually help in some places because it's a buffer. If you've got Islamic groups, they're monitoring what you're doing. Oh, that's not a synagogue, this is a church, because they only meet once or twice a week there, or other groups as well. There were some BLM protesters who were picketing the different Messianic congregations in DFW a few years ago.
Okay.
It was a huge legal issue with that. But these are the factors we got to start thinking through. We got to start putting it out there on the table for people to sort through. But I remember many years ago, it was David Chernoff. It was at the Southwestern Regional where he let everyone know, it's 2014. I believe the Messianic movement is the end time move of God.
Do
And
you agree with that?
I actually do agree with that.
Okay.
I actually do agree with that. Now, while I believe it's the end time move, because the only one which has the Romans 11:26, all Israel will be saved trajectory in front of it. These other movements, as good as they are, really don't. But along with that, we don't know what shape it's going to take as the future unfolds.
Oh, amen to that. It changes all the time.
Yeah, I mean, about 10 years of the Messianic community is like 100 million years of Earth the other way, or I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And yes, all of us have made mistakes along the way. We've had to say, "Hey, I got to fix this. Please forgive me," and we move on. We're all human, but I think we do have a lot of potential to make a lot of difference in the future. Yet, how many people are paying attention and plugging into that?
Okay, so yes, please touch on how some conservative entities that once backed Israel now are turning their backs on Israel. How do you handle that?
Well, right now, I think the real wonder to behold is what happened to Candace Owens, and
Okay.
also along with that, what happened to Tucker Carlson? Because a few years ago, many of us were listening to those people in some way. Uh, Last year, I remember Tucker Carlson was interviewing John Rich. John
Yep.
Rich, the country singer,
Sure.
and his father was a minister, and he was talking about how uh, John Rich was talking about how he was no longer a supporter of the pre-trib rapture, this idea that believers get beamed out, and he says, that's created a lot of problems for you know Christianity in America. And it's like, oh yeah, that and we would all like really agree with that. But then John Rich said yes, and this is caused by dispensationalism, which originated with the Schofield Reference Bible, which was funded by the Rothschild Zionist bankers. And then that led into, oh yes, and support of a Jewish homeland and Zionism and all these Christians who think that Israel is the timepiece for the last days. And isn't the church the new Israel? So that is something which I know caught many people by surprise, because I saw a lot of people pass around just that clip of the pre-trib is no good, but then they didn't see the other wider narrative. And we're going to have to be up on our game in a way we probably haven't been up on it in a while. Uh, you know, and I think that for a number of the Messianic Jewish pioneers, some of whom are still, holding on to the pre-trib rapture escape, they're gonna have the most difficult time in the next couple of years as things unfold.
Well, they're a signless group, so they believe in the doctrine of imminence, which means that nothing needs to occur before the pre-trib rapture. Well,
Right,
so you and I, okay, we're news hounds, okay? We both have the poli sci degrees, and we
right.
both scope out the news. My father was the same way. My father taught me that you hold the Bible in this hand and the newspaper in this hand, and you just compare back and forth. And so he would give his news event sermons at the end of the year, every year, and I kind of do the same thing now with my videos. The main point is that there aren't many of us that do this, that gather the news. There's John, you do an excellent job. Thank you. I do it. There's a guy named John Haller that does it. Many of the pre-trippers don't gather the news in the same way. They will tell you about the news, but they won't talk about it because it could violate their little contract with the doctrine of imminence because it's silence, right?
Yeah, and actually, also a big part of monitoring the news is, yeah, we got to pay attention to, like, right now, the two big situations are Israel, Hamas, and Russia, Ukraine.
Sure.
Um, but there are going to be things in the news which affect religion. It's going to affect Christianity. They're going to affect the Messianic community, regardless of if they are directly or indirectly connected to the end times. Like, woke. That's going to affect people on the ground. There was a When woke hit, a lot of people, in the Messianic community are aware of this. So this is now public knowledge. It's common knowledge. When woke started to hit 2022, 2022, 2023. So it was I believe it was in 2022. We were at the Messiah conference, and I was giving one of a presentation on Monday afternoon. At the same time, there's the big Messianic Jewish leaders meeting, and MJA had just adopted into its statement of belief, and they'd have it legally, looked at and everything. Marriage is one man and one woman, and homosexuality is prohibited by, and all these other deviant things are prohibited by Scripture. And many of the baby boomer leaders thought this was just as easy. We're going to have a vote on it, and then boom, we're going to get it in. No, 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 no. A huge contingent of YMJA people said, no, we don't agree with this. And, we think this is too hard to our gay and lesbian and transgender friends. And all of a sudden, throughout the week, particularly at the different meals in the cafeteria, where that's where you interact with other leaders, across North America. I mean, we got people literally saying, "What is woke? I have no idea what woke is." And it's like, okay, let's tell you what woke is. It's a lot of really far left, hyper progressive, super liberal. It's affected progressive Christianity. By the way, most of my extended family, they're liberal Protestants. And a lot of your Jewish family, they're probably super liberal as well. Oh yeah, they are. And a good Messianic Jewish friend of ours, who's a psychologist. His mother was a psychologist, all from New York. She was like, "Yeah, different strokes for different folks, and here's a joint if you want it." So that's what that's how we had to have a crash course in what woke was. And a lot of people in the Messianic world, and I love them, but they do kind of live in this bubble. And when they think, "Oh, that'll never hit my congregation, that'll never hit my group," we're biblically solid, we're Torah solid, it'll never hit. Next week, something happens.
Now, the other thing is, if we are the end times movement that you mentioned, you said that a little while
Right.
ago, why wouldn't Satan send in people just to irritate us,
Oh, he
frustrate
would.
us? Yeah.
He would, absolutely. Actually, it's been our family's consistent experience, because of the significant mission and purpose the Messianic community is here for: Jewish outreach, Jewish evangelism, Israel solidarity, helping to see non-Jewish believers called, plugged into their faith heritage and Israel scriptures, co-laboring with Jewish believers, fixing a lot of the things warned against in Romans 11, all this. Because of that high potential, we also have this huge risk of attracting a much higher quantity of people with, how do I say this politely, issues.
We'll just pop this up just so you can see. This is going to be the fall, guys. And John and I are going to be covering this. I have my videos, you have your videos and things like that. But yeah, they're all going to be claiming this is going to be our fall. That that there's going to be a rapture on Rosh Hashanah. I mean, it's going to be crazy, right, John?
Yeah, it is. And actually, there's probably more things we should be paying attention to here. On the American home front, we got Epstein, we got RussiaGate. That's going to hit, next month into the fall. That's certainly going to change people's perception of, the U.S. government. Who can I trust? Who can I not trust? We've got these other conflicts. Regardless of what position one takes, you can be secular. We are approaching some point event with the Israel Gaza situation, because all the governments in the world are losing patience with Israel right now. The different G7 governments, which have yet to recognize a Palestinian state. So we've got United Kingdom, France, Germany, possibly Australia, New Zealand, Canada. They're planning to recognize a Palestinian state. So we
That
are going to
really
see.
helped the negotiations, John.
I
I mean,
know.
it
We're gonna
killed
see some things. And even if,
France.
and mind you, because I've heard so many predictions of the last days over many years. Let's say Trump is able to pull out a peace agreement with Russia, Ukraine. He's able to pull out some kind of agreement, Israel, Hamas. We're still not going to see the anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism die down. That's going
Wouldn't
to be with us.
wouldn't you see the Abraham Accords also pick up speed? I mean, they're not talking about them at all because they have other
No.
issues. But
Yeah.
what
Yes,
do you
I
think
could.
of the Abraham Accords?
I think Donald Trump is a different president than we've seen in the past, because on one side he is kind of a pain in the New World Order's ass. Sorry, but on the other side he does believe in peace through strength and commerce. So he operates like a businessman. So his belief is, if we can get all these different people locked in economically, they'll be less inclined to fight themselves, because if they fight themselves, then they'll lose prosperity. I think that is how he operates. Does the Middle East operate that way? Not so much. So I think he's going to make as many attempts as he can. I think I said this many years ago when he was elected the first time, elected the second time. Do we have a line extension of time with freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of speech? Take advantage of it as much as you can, because one day we may not have it.
So
And
peace
take
and
advantage.
safety, First
What's it?
Thessalonians 5:3, peace and safety. Are we possibly going to see that?
I think things are building in that direction. The question I have had, and we may just have to wait, because I know a lot of people, they think they got the end times figured out, and then God says, you know, you got some of it figured out. You don't have it all.
Right. Yeah.
Is that a short period of time, or is it a longer period of time? And in one of my studies a number of years ago, that's a question I never thought of before. And this is just the way I operate. Political science training. We have possibility A, possibility B, possibility C, possibility D. So, well, a lot of people think that's a very short period of time, and it could be. What if it is a longer period of time? And in that period of time, if that could happen, how many people are going to be lulled into spiritual dormancy? So it fulfills that other prophecy. Where's the promise of his coming?
Okay.
And I remember, getting a book handed to me a number of years ago. I don't remember how the gentleman came to this conclusion, but his premise was, and again, we just put things out there and we wait and we see. We're analysts. We wait and we see.
Yeah.
But his premise was, what would we do if, okay, after Yeshua's ascension into heaven, the temple operated for another 40 years, and animal sacrifices and everything? What would we do if before Yeshua's second coming, the temple was operating for 40 years? How would that change the religious spectrum? Yeah, and that's like, well, I know PETA memberships would go skyrocketing through the roof, and anti-Semitism would hit levels we have never seen before, ever,
Okay.
because we don't know what it's like to live in a society which has animal sacrifice. We don't.
No, we don't.
Uh, I mean,
We don't
even
understand tameh and tahor. Can you explain those two words to the people?
uh, right, clean and unclean.
Ritually, yes.
Yes. Yeah, and I say this politely. I mean, even pagan Greeks and Romans in the first century understood animal sacrifice better than we do.
Right.
Because we don't know what it's like to see that constantly. So I think we're going into a time, and I guess I'll have to close off with this. Uh, Way back when, back in the mid 1990s, I remember hearing a teaching, and it stressed that one of the reasons why many Jews of the Second Temple period missed Yeshua's Messiah is because they had all these ideas about what the Messiah was supposed to do, and many of them were accurate, many of them were inaccurate. And of course, what happened is that rather than coming to overthrow the Romans, Yeshua was executed by the Romans. But it was by virtue of his resurrection from the dead, which caused the disciples and apostles to, I got to reevaluate how we approach some of these prophecies. Did we get some of them accurate? What possibly do we have to reevaluate? And so at the second coming, it's very much the same thing. We've got a lot of ideas about the second coming, many of which are accurate, many of which we don't have all the information today. And some of it we're going to have to wait until we get there to get the information.
Okay, so before we leave, I'd like to play Pin the Tail on the Antichrist, on the Beast. Just for a moment here, I'm having problems with my mouse. There it goes. Okay, so Pin the Tail on the Antichrist, and we have Beast. Are any of these people the Antichrist?
No, I don't think so. But they might be representing the country where he lives, hopefully in diapers right now.
Oh, okay. How old are your children, John?
Oh, I don't have any children.
Oh, you don't? Okay, all right, that's fine. So, bottom line is, you're not sensing. Okay, do you think a Gentile or an Arab could be the Antichrist?
It could be. I'm inclined to think it has to be someone who has some kind of Jewish ancestry.
Okay. What about this guy?
Uh, no, I think I mean, he's a bad dude, but no.
Okay. And then what about this guy that has pancreatic cancer and seems to be slowing down?
Now, I do look at some of his grandchildren as possibilities,
Okay.
but I'm more inclined to the direction of looking at one of these obscure European royal families, which has been, taken out. You know, um, that's what I'm looking more at. I'm more interested in that direction. But we monitor these people because they're still going to affect the world.
You
And
realize that two men wrote books about this guy
yes, I do. I
saying
do. I use them as props frequently.
Tim Cohen, Craig. I'll come up with his name in a second. Bong, and they absolutely believe this is the guy, and
No, he's going to probably pass away, and
yeah.
in all probability, the British monarchy itself is an endangered species.
Do we need it? I don't think we need it. So anyway, oh sorry. What about that guy right there, the little guy standing next to Trump?
No, I don't think so. Uh, not that he is wonderful, but no, I don't think so.
Okay, interesting. So that's about it. We aren't going to play much of this, which is pin the tail on the Antichrist. But I wanted to get your thoughts on it just because it's so much fun. And there we go. We're back
Well,
again.
and it's definitely not Klaus Schwab, because I saw a picture of Klaus Schwab a number of years ago in a Speedo, and I'm like, uh,
Ooh, I
no,
saw it.
yeah, there's no way that guy could be it.
No, he's not the guy. So the main thing is, people, you don't know who the Antichrist is. If John doesn't know, and I don't know, nobody knows.
Although
Okay.
one of the things which was interesting, because I wanted to check, and I told people this very frequently, the methodology used to find Prince Charles of Wales to 666. I said, I need to check on this myself.
Sure.
So I took my full name, John Kimball McKee, and it adds up to 333.
Ooh.
So I'm only half of the beast I could be.
And you're from Scotland, which
Uh,
Blackford is too. So yeah.
right. So I am a Scottish American. Now my sister's husband, Alan Ferguson, he is from Bridge of Erne. So
I've
he
never
is,
heard of that. Okay.
yeah, it's between Edinburgh and Perth.
Oh my, that's
So
close to where
yes,
my family is from, the Blackford family.
right. And Clan Mackay of Larg, that's immediately west of Glasgow.
Interesting. Well, you're proud of that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we were adopted, so it's funny. And then my daughter went out to 23andMe, I think it was, and figured out that we were part Jewish. I always thought I was, but then it turns out she's 16% ish, and I'm probably 33%. And I don't know
Wow.
how that quite works out.
Well, we all come from somewhere, and
Yeah,
hopefully our background has important virtues we can use for the kingdom.
there you go. All right. So, how do they find you again, John? How do they find
Uh,
your videos and things like that?
yes, you can go to messianicapologetics.net. And from there, you can check out our ministry. And I do have a 5 times a week live stream, 1 o'clock Central Time. Messianic Insider, we do both theology as well as a news roundup.
Perfect. And I watched the show. I'm enjoying it because I wasn't sure where you were going with it at first with your show, and now you're doing some teaching and then current events and things like that. It's a good mixture. I like the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, people, we had fun tonight. Thank you, John, for joining us tonight. Thank you, everybody, for joining the show. And be blessed. And we'll see you again soon. John, stay on after I click off.
Thank you.